Quinoa is often labeled a superfood, and for the most part, that's with pretty good reason. It's pretty justified because it has so many great vitamins and minerals and properties to it that are really advantageous for anti-aging and longevity and lifespan. However, there is a dark side to quinoa, and I have four little reminders, or perhaps you call them warnings, that I want to give you here in this podcast. And I say this mainly because after 30 years as a health coach, I have seen too many people getting really attached to quote unquote superfoods like quinoa and making it too big a part of their diet to still be a good, healthy choice. They start to make it like 20%, 30% or more of their diet, and they actually start doing more harm to themselves than good. So I'm going to illustrate what those four items are, those points of concern that I have for you in just a moment. First, please be sure to like and subscribe so more people see this video in the algorithm and so you can get more videos like this from my channel in the future. All right, that said, let's first start with the omega-3 content and the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio that you find in quinoa. Now, I often read that quinoa is a great source of omega-3s. I see this a lot. You say, oh, for omega-3s, go get quinoa. Well, the truth is the ratio that you want, if there was a perfect food out there, it would be about a 1-to-1 ratio or a 2-to-1 when we're looking at omega-6s to omega-3s. Now, quinoa is a 6-to-1. So is it a lot better than a lot of the food out there where it's like a 10-to-1, a 15-to-1 or worse? Yeah, it's better in this regard, in the conversation of omega-6 to omega-3 than a lot of foods out there. However, theoretically, if you made most of your caloric content come from quinoa or from a food similar to quinoa that has that similar ratio, you would be missing out on some great health benefits by getting the omega-6s to the omega-3s into a better ratio. Again, you generally want to be like 3-to-1, 2-to-1, or 1-to-1. You don't want to be 6-to-1. Okay, so kind of a small concern, but it is a concern nonetheless. Now, moving on to my second concern is its oxalate content. Now, oxalic acid or oxalate, when it's leaving the body, it binds with calcium, and this can lead to, in worst case scenario, kidney stones. And I have heard stories, horror stories, of people over consuming foods like quinoa that can have that high oxalate content and that can start to lead to the potential for kidney stones. So, unless you're really monitoring regularly, unless you're getting blood work very regularly or getting your analyses regularly, there's always that risk if you're over consuming in quinoa. So now let's move on to number 3. Now, my number 3 concern is more about body fat or potentially being under muscled. Quinoa is often labeled as a food great in protein, but that's not true. A food great in protein wouldn't have a carb content that's literally 5 times the protein content. Just to put things in perspective, generally speaking, your meal plan should have about as many carbs as proteins for the most part, or maybe a 2-to-1 ratio at most, where the carbs are about double the protein. I don't ever really imagine, even for endurance athletes, really going any higher than that on carbohydrates for the most part. And yet, when you look at the content of carbohydrate to protein in quinoa, it's 5-to-1. And that's tremendous. So again, theoretically, if you made the bulk of your foods that way throughout the day, you would have far too many carbs, not enough protein in your diet. And ultimately, you'd really be at the risk of being over fat, under muscled, or very likely both. So again, this is another concern of mine. Now, my final point about quinoa, my final warning, if you will, is that quinoa also, although it's a great source of fiber, a lot of that fiber is insoluble. Some people do better with that than others. Some people have more of a tolerance for it than others. But if you're getting a lot of insoluble fiber, you should really keep an eye out for feelings of like gas and bloating and cramps. If you're getting those soon after eating quinoa, I would suggest that you're probably getting too much insoluble fiber. So that may be solely from the quinoa, or it may be from other sources in your diet as well, where you just have insoluble fiber coming in from too many sources in too big of quantities on the same days. So anyway, everybody, that's all I've got about quinoa. Again, overall, it's a great superfood. It does have fantastic properties to it. My warnings here are just that you don't want to overconsume, that you do want to make sure it's balanced nicely into your meal plan and not overrepresented. If you have questions for me, please reach out to me anytime. You can comment down below. You can call me. You can go to one of my websites. They're in the description. And of course, as always, I'm looking forward to your health and your wellness success. Thanks so much, everybody.